Well, welcome back, everyone. Good to see all your names again. Actually, I should say see you all again, but I don't usually see actually too many people. But welcome to the organic dry bean production course. And as most everybody knows, today is the last day of the class. And of course, we saved the best for last. And we hope everybody's enjoyed the course and been able to access all the materials online. Um, and again, if you missed a webinar, they are posted online, so you can always go back and watch them, and you can go back and watch them as many times as you want now that you've taken the class. So as I've said in the past, this is the organic dry bean production course, and it's being brought to you through our Eco Bean project, which is a collaboration between the University of Vermont, the University of Maine, the University of Wisconsin, and Cornell University. And our Eco Bean project has been funded through the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And through that project, we have been conducting research as well as delivering research information and other information to you around growing dry beans organically. And so this class is part of that larger project. And today we'll be talking about harvesting and storing beans and much more than that along the process. And we're joined by Seth Johnson, a bean farmer here in Vermont and grows lots of other things as well. So we'll be hearing from him in a minute. And we also have our research roundup today as well. So it's going to be an action packed day. And I don't want to delay the intro too long. And I will turn it over to Ivy.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, we have a lot of good information, so I'll keep this short. This is our last class. At the end, we have a survey we'll share with folks that we'd really appreciate you filling out just to give us a sense of, what you learned during the course. So we'll share that at the end, and there will be one crop management credit available. So we'll also have that QR code for you at the end of the session. So Seth Johnson from Morningstar Farm in Glover, Vermont, is going to talk to us today about harvest and storage, plus all other aspects of dry bean production. So him and his family have been producing a variety of organic dry beans on their farm in northeastern Vermont since 2004, and they have a vast experience in equipment and strategies for harvest, cleaning, drying, and storing dry beans on a small and large scale. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to jump right into Seth's presentation.
I don't usually actually run the pullers and the windrower together like you see on the tractor on our 4030 there. I found I like to pull early in the morning when the dew's still on, but pull and do it in two stages. So basically pull first. And so I think that's a video. That lower one's a video. It shows it's a 4-row puller matched to my planter. And it's basically a big series, each row has a knife. It's about 36 inches long. And it actually doesn't cut the roots off. You'd think it would. It kind of lifts them out and pushes them to the side. And this is actually a puller that I got from Butterworks. And the only other modification I made when I got it from Jack was to add down pressure. So these are pretty clean here. But if you have grass or weeds at all, you really need some down pressure to kind of keep that knife in the ground. And so I like to pull first, let the weeds, if you have any grass or weeds in there, dry down a day. And then the next morning, go in with the windrower. So we actually have a 6-row Heath windrower. And so obviously, if you have a 4-row puller and a 6-row windrower, you can see why it works better to go in 2 steps, because you wouldn't want to be, I have a 6-row puller, but it's really too wide. And we have some hilly conditions, and the 4 rows it works a lot better than the 6-row puller. So that video on the left, I think if you play that, it'll show these are some black beans that we're windrowing. It basically just takes those 3 double rows and there's belts similar to like a hay merger, but basically the belts bring it gently to the middle. And it's really important you do this same thing in the morning when the pods are somewhat flexible. Otherwise, anybody with a puller or windrower can tell you'll be flinging beans all over the place, including at yourself. So it's better to have it have a little bit of dew and moisture on there. All right, and I think the next one is going to be the combines. So we actually sold this combine a couple years ago. It's a Bob's Model 44. I got this from Butterworks as well. And this really was a great addition. It was getting harder to find parts for it. So 2 years ago, we actually sold this and bought a pair of Lilliston combines from a guy out actually in Dansville, New York. And they were shed kept in really good shape. It's a little different process, a little different way of handling the beans pneumatically. It's a little more gentle, I feel. And they're center pull instead of off to the side like this one is. But this machine did a lot of acres of beans for us. And then that's the two upper pictures are the same machine. And then the lower one is a John Deere 9500 that we use we use for all of our grains. And yeah, it's another video of the Bobs there. It's really farmer engineered, but really crude, but works well. And then we use that for all our larger edible beans, the smaller beans like small reds, sometimes pintos, and definitely blacks. We run through the machine at the bottom, which is our 9500. It's a flex head, so it gets right on the ground and does a really good job, has more capacity, can do a lot more in a day. You just have to be more mindful of rocks. That's probably the number one thing, picking up rocks in the machine. Or if you have soil with this type of rocks that are similar in size to beans, you're going to have a lot more stones in your beans. So anyways, the next one after that, I think, is a couple cleaners. Post-harvest, we have a spiral separator, which you don't use all that often, but it was got it a few years ago, and it takes out splits really well. So basically, there's a series of flutes that run down the inside of those spirals, and if you don't have an optical sorter and you don't want to clean them all by hand, then this works really well because the round beans roll to the outside. The splits or flat stones stay in the middle and don't roll, so they slide down the middle, and you have two buckets at the bottom. The clean beans come out one. It's pretty slow. It's just a small scale cleaner, but nevertheless, it does well with splits. And then the one on the right is just a really simple fanning mill that we run everything through, and it doesn't have any augers on it. So we actually have a bagging station. We run everything through a pre-cleaner first out of the field, which is like a screen on an angle, which takes the bulk of the dirt out and big stuff. And then we run it through this machine, which takes the bulk of the big stuff and the small stuff out before drying. And then if you go to the next slide, it'll show our old system of drying and then our newer dryer. So the old system, I just wanted to include the first slide of the bags because we actually dry it up to like 7 to 8 acres a year like that. We just put beans in these 75-pound burlap bags. And we got the idea from some bean farmers in Maine years ago. And we dried, 10, 15 tons a year like that. Actually, we got it mostly dry in the field, but those fans are actually blowing air down through those stacks, and you stuff all the holes between the bags, and then it blows air. It has to be in a heated space, like a shop. So you're blowing drier air through them, but it actually works pretty effective for small amounts of beans. And then the larger dryer there is one I got from Butterworks. You can dry up to 10,000 pounds much quicker. We set that up in a shed, and then we usually have a small heat source that's taking the moisture out of the air, but set up blowing into the intake. And there's a fan, if you can see on the bottom of it's on wheels, but it's got a fan on one side and an auger on the other. And then we run everything through there to dry it. And the bottom picture on the left is just an interior picture of that same dryer. So, all right, so here we're looking at a Forsberg gravity air table. I believe this one's a 900. We've had it for about 15 years. Got it from an old bean farm in Maine. And so basically kind of the way what you're going to be watching here on the Gravity Air table is basically is kind of like an air hockey table, so to speak. It's got air that's blowing up through the table while the beans are shaking. And so what it does is it sorts by density. So the better beans go up to the right-hand side. The beans enter the table here on the left corner there, and then they're separated by density. And so you can see the beans are really nice and clean on the right-hand side of the table. And so what it's doing is the heavier, better beans are actually rising up to the top of the table. And then because the beans are like 2 to 3 beans deep on the table, what happens is the lighter trash and weed seeds actually goes down to the left. So these are the number ones, which are really the best, heaviest beans. And you'd take your seed out of this lot here. The number twos right here. This is basically the kind of mid-grade beans. They're still good enough, but they're not quite as heavy and perfect as the number ones. And that slat to the left of my hand there actually is movable, so you can actually adjust it based on where the beans are kind of coming off the table. You can adjust that to the left or to the right. And then everything on the left side of that slot right there is what's the recycle. So it's going back down through and making another pass. This one here, that last section is actually the culls. And so that's what you're removing. So the whole reason you're running this machine is to separate them into ones and twos, but also to take out that portion of my hand, which I'm holding right now. And those are, you'll see there's some splits in there. But it's mostly, in this case, kale seed, which this gravity table does an excellent job taking out. You can see the bags hanging below. So you can have different setups, but you'll see we have we handle it by bags. The number ones are on the right and the number twos are on the left. My son there, Herlif, is just taking the bags out and replacing with a new bag. So you can see that tube that's going down to the left. That's the recycle. So everything from that section, there's a small pipe that's angling down to the left that actually runs to an elevator, which brings it back up around. And so that slat that's sticking up in the air right there is adjustable, like I was saying. And so you can adjust what goes into the recycle as opposed to what goes into that number two bag. And so it's really, really adjustable, very accurate. You can adjust the rate of shake. You can adjust the amount of air. You can adjust the tilt of the table, both left to right and front to back. So there's a lot of adjustments to it. But different shape beans, yeah, we can just kind of go on loop here. So you can see the beans, there's kind of a surge bin up above there and it flows down in. And then you can actually see what's cool is those lines on the table are actually the veins of air that are coming up through the beans. You know, these beans are pretty dirty, so it's a kind of a great opportunity to show kind of how this table works. And then from there, you'll see those number one beans aren't perfect, but from there, we bring it up to the next step for us, which is color sorting, which will take out the remaining debris. I wanted to mention too, these culls here, these are a little dirty to use for animal feed right here because it's mostly kale seed, but a lot of times it's mostly splits or just light beans. And those right there, actually, we have an animal feed program, chicken, pig feed that we grind, and they go into our feed program. So nothing's wasted, which is nice from a management standpoint. You hate to throw as much work as it takes to grow these things. You hate to throw anything away, but that's an excellent opportunity to kind of utilize the culls, so to speak. Before we had a color sorter, we actually would use a spiral separator too, which we showed earlier in the presentation, and that spiral separator separates things that roll from things that don't. So that's an excellent opportunity to take splits out as well with a spiral separator. All right, so this is our color sorter. It's made by actually the distributor is LMC Canada. LMC is originally a U.S. company, but they have a division based out of Saskatchewan. And they make this here size was a brand new option last year. It's called a mini sort. And so basically color sorters are designated by the number of chutes they have. And the chute is typically about 12 inches wide. And then you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chute machines, very large, very high capacity. But this is a mini sort, so it's actually got a 6-inch chute. So they call it like a half a chute. But it will still clean, according to the tech here, it can clean up to 6,000 pounds an hour, far more than you could really feed it by hand. So we have it kind of in a temporary setup right now, actually in our a heated basement because it's a computer and camera, so it works a lot better in a climate controlled space. So basically, the way we currently have it configured, you can see we have a small platform to stand on, and there's a stainless hopper at the top that we basically just dump them in, dump a bag into 2 5-gallon buckets, and you can also get an elevator or a drag conveyor or something to feed that with, but it's just as easy for us to dump it in with buckets. And then essentially, you have a screen where you do all the programming on the front, which is blank right now. And then you can see on the sides that super bright light. That's actually the very high resolution cameras and LED lights that are down in there that are looking at each bean as it flows down in front of the ejectors. And so that side bright light is actually covered with a colored glass now, so it's not going to blind you. But right now, the way you're looking at it, it's super bright because that cover's missing off there. But essentially, the way it works is that the beans flow down in front of this down this chute, and there's 32 ejectors, which we'll show later here on the video. But basically, the cameras are looking at both sides of the bean. So when you're cleaning by hand on a typical hand belt like we used to do, you're really only looking at half of the bean, the top half. You can't even see the bottom. But this thing is actually looking at 360 degrees all the way around the bean. And then essentially in the video, you'll see as the beans flow down the chute, there's 32 ejectors and 32 channels. And essentially it looks at, the beans as they're flowing, and it tells ejector 3 or ejector 4 or 6 to shoot a blast of air. And so the main stream of beans are flowing straight down to the right into that hopper we have there in a bowl. And those are the accepts. So everything good comes out of there. In the front is what's called the rejects. And so you can see there's a little slide gate on that bottom of that reject chute. So it really doesn't, if your beans are pretty clean, there's not a lot coming out there, but yeah, that's where you're going to get your splits and your stones and debris or beans that are off colored, that are all going to come out of that rejects. Now, eventually, when we get this set up in a more permanent facility, we'll have this on like a level 2 of a facility. Above, we'll have a surge bin, and then these chutes will each get piped down into bulk bags or bagging station down on level 1 of the facility. So that's essentially how these are typically run. Is they're on level 2, the beans come through them and they get sorted and they fall down into large baggers or bulk totes down below. It's much more efficient than doing it. But for our scale and size, we're only cleaning like 12 to 20 tons a year or something. So, it works great in this regard for us. So, yeah. And so that's Mike. Actually, he's the tech that came out when we bought this machine, and he came for several days, actually stayed in the area and helped us calibrate all the different varieties that we had, and also did grains with us, sunflowers and wheat. So it'll pretty much clean any grain related item by color. So this is the color sorter in action. Here you can see we're dumping the beans in through the hopper, and they're flowing down through the chute here. Essentially, this is the blindingly bright light that's unshielded right now, but it's flowing down in front of the ejectors, and then these are the accepts that you're keeping, and then the rejects. And you'll see there's some good beans in this, but it's okay because we actually run it through again and take out the good ones. So yeah, so that would be all what you'd have to be sorting by hand if you were doing it the old way. So all right, so here we'll just run through it again. So the hopper goes in, and then so here you can kind of get a good look at the bottom of the chute is a vibratory table. So what's essentially that whole bottom chute is vibrating, and you can adjust. It's infinitely variable from 1 to 100, the rate of vibration, and that's how you adjust your flow rate. You can adjust on that. There's that chute on the right, on the right side, on the top of the screen there. There's wing nuts, you can adjust that. But essentially, you don't. Once you get that set, we never play with that. You adjust your rate of flow with the amount of vibration. And so this is essentially the chute that we were talking about. There's a plexiglass sheet in front of that to keep them from bouncing out. But essentially, they're flowing down through, and the bright lights and cameras, LED lights and cameras, are down below. That's actually doing the inspecting. But when the beans are flowing down through the chute, they're actually kind of there's grooves in that chute, and they're getting kind of segregated into kind of grooves or channels, so that when the camera looks at it, it can fire in split milliseconds. It tells that the distance between the camera and the ejectors is very, very close, but essentially it decides in a few nanoseconds, like, whether it's something you program which is good or bad. And if it's good, it gets to pass through. If it's bad, the ejector will fire. And it's pretty loud when this thing's running. Now you can see the beans are flowing down through the chute. The cameras are behind the glass on the right and on the left. And what's cool is actually the glass has to be cleaned from time to time. So you can see there's a little on the left, there's an arm and actually a mini windshield wiper. See that? Like on the left side, that's actually what cleans. So every once in a while, this thing will shut down. And it scares you half to death because the whole thing shuts and you're like, oh, what happened? But like it literally shuts down for a second and you can hear it go across, and it goes one way and then comes back the other. And on both sides, you can see on the right side too, there's a mini windshield wiper. It's like 6 inches long, and it cleans that glass you can program it for different times, but essentially it cleans that glass so the camera can do a good job. If you ever do get a little bit of junk on that glass, what'll happen is the ejector will stay open. It'll keep blowing, and you're like, what's going on? It sounds like a air leak, but when this thing's running, it actually sounds like popcorn popping. That's exactly what it sounds like. Everyone says it sounds like popcorn, and essentially that's those ejectors that are firing. And in this video, you can't really see what the ejectors are doing, but we're going to play another video that'll show in slow motion up close kind of what they're doing. But essentially, this is where all the action's taking place, right inside this window here. So the good beans are flowing straight down through into the accepts. These are the accepts, which are 99.9% good. Occasionally it'll miss one. You just basically sort it out by hand. And then the rejects are when they're firing, it's getting caught. And as you can see, this is all the different off types, but also splits, any debris that the gravity table might have missed. There are some good beans, like I mentioned in here, but essentially we wait till we get a few hundred pounds, essentially a long time. But we will run them through again, and then it'll clean up and take all the good. The tech said you're better off to set it for doing a moderately good job. If you try to get them too perfect, you'll end up having some bad stuff in your accepts. So we try to get it set just about. And there's different thresholds. There's sensitivity settings, so you can essentially make those ejectors fire at more or less, just based on what your sensitivity settings are. But in order to know how to run one of these, you essentially take a programming class too. That's part of it. But the techs are really good with this particular company, LMC and Vistasort. Like they're just a phone call away. They're in Canada, so it's a pleasure working with them. And Sean, we bought I should mention Sean McGivern at North Valley Ag and Milling up in New Brunswick was the rep for this, and he's the same way, like really, really just really helpful. And that's part of when you're buying one of these machines, none of us farmers are really computer programmers, I don't think. So you're really buying the tech support after the sale as much as anything, because there's a million different settings on this thing, and you'd get lost trying to set it by yourself. So it's really helpful. But this thing is turned down in this view, like it's only running at a third or half speed. That vibration is set up really fast. Like I said, if you're cleaning 3 tons an hour, that would be really cranking for us. But it essentially will do the same job running fast as it will running slow. He actually said that the machine actually does a little better if you run it a little faster. It does a better job. So anyways, but yeah, and I should mention too, it changes from year to year too. You'll get everything set, and the first year it worked great, and then this year I went to clean this year's beans, and it wasn't doing a great job, and I'm like, what is going on? And the color had changed slightly from one year to the next. So you do have to make adjustments from year to year. You save your programming, But essentially, and beans will darken with age too, like pintos or kidneys will darken as they age. And so we have a program for beans that are a little older, you know, like say a year old, and we have a program for beans that are fresh out of the field because they're slightly different colors. So, anyways, but yeah, so it's really transformed our operation. You know, this thing can clean in an hour what would have taken us 3 or 4 people all day long, 8, 10 hours in the past. It's really, you know, enabled us to focus on other things that are really important on the farm and not just be tied to sorting beans by hand for hours and hours every winter. All right, so here we're looking at the color sorter in action. The beans are flowing down in front of this chute, and you can see on the left and right side of the screen are the really high resolution cameras are through that glass, and the lights which are right there, which are shining at both sides of the bean. And the ejectors are basically the nozzles that are the black portion right in the center of the screen, and they're fastened down to the machine with the small stainless screws you can see, but the nozzles are actually on the front of each on the right hand side. And there's 32 ejectors, and you can see every once in a while right there, it'll actually fire. And these beans aren't really dirty, so I probably should have chose a sample that was a little dirtier so you could see more. But you can see every once in a while, basically when they fire, the cameras have told the ejector number 3 or 4 or 5, whichever, to fire and shoot it out of that stream into a separate chute. And so this is all happening in like, you know, milliseconds. But there's a bunch of different parameters that you're looking at based on color and what it is. And sometimes the ejectors have difficulty with something that's really heavy because you can eject how much air they blow. So for stones, like stones weigh a lot more and then like say a split does. So they'd have trouble doing both at the same time. So essentially, if you have a lot of stones, if you have the soil type where you have a lot of stones, you'd want to run them through a destoner first, so you don't have to deal with lots of stones in your beans. We don't thankfully have many stones in our soil type, but yeah, this is slow-mo, but it's actually slowed down even more to actually see what's going on. When they're actually flowing, it's really difficult to see this in action. But yeah, there you can see when it blows them off, it shoots them off really, really, really hard. And so the machine's actually kind of loud when it's running because the beans are rattling around in these stainless chutes. And so usually when we're cleaning, we run like earplugs or earmuffs or something just to kind of save your hearing a little bit. But it's pretty effective. So this is where all the action happens. It's pretty cool.
All right. So we do have I'll say about 10-ish minutes where we can answer some questions before we jump in to our research roundup. I guess we'll just start. Seth, could you, Lynn Clarkson had a question. They weren't familiar with a bean puller, and could you describe it a little bit more?
Sure. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so there's a couple different kind of bean pullers that are used. You have either pickets or knife pullers. And so the type we use are knife pullers. So essentially it's a really long blade that's not like super sharp, but it's like 3 feet long or so. And it's running at like, you saw they were on the front of that tractor, and it's running at like a 45-degree angle to the row. And so as you drive down through the row, essentially it's not like cutting the roots off, but it's kind of pulling them up and out of the ground and pushing them to the center. So if you have a 4-row puller like we do, then you have 2 rows that are getting pushed to the middle between the wheels, and you have a row that's being pushed to the right and to the left. And if you have 6-row pullers, it's obviously you've got it's covering 2 more rows beyond that. But those are knife pullers that we've had really good luck with. If you have lots of weeds though in your beans, you can have trouble with any kind of pulling, excessive weeds. With these particular pullers, having, like I mentioned, having the ability to have some down pressure is really important. The other style, which some people might be familiar with more out in the Midwest and Michigan and stuff, are pickets, which are basically it's like a hexagon shaped shaft that's spinning underneath the ground, essentially doing the same thing. But those you can't have a lot of rocks. If you have rocks, you can bend that shaft. But essentially they do the same thing. They're just disconnecting the beans out of the ground, and then you have to still run through it with a windrower to essentially take those rows and put them into a windrow like you would for like hay for a baler or something. You saw the way that the combine picks it up. So, anyways, yeah.
Thank you. I put the slide up there just so people could see the picture again. And I'll point out, so we have all of these videos as well. So on the course page, if people want to go back and watch them again, we'll have these slides available later too. Nick asked, Seth, do you have an estimate of the cost of a color sorter like that?
Yeah, so it's roughly like they're usually super expensive, like, $100,000 or something for like a full shoot or multiple shoots. And so I think this one, I should say the caveat, it was before the tariffs, the Canadian tariffs and everything went into place, because I think Kristen Laurie, I'm not sure if she's on here today, has looked into this, but currently it's quite a bit more money with the tariffs, Canadian tariffs. And so I think this half shoot machine was around 50 to 60,000 with the compressor, because you also need a really fancy air compressor to go with it. That's a two tank or two stage air compressor that has a wet tank and a dry tank. Because this machine, you can't just use a regular Home Depot air compressor on it, or avoids the warranty, because it needs super dry, stable, clean air. So you have to have a wet tank, and then it has a desiccant dryer that goes into a dry tank, and then the machine pulls air off that second tank. So it's a pretty nice, quiet air compressor, but it's essential to the machine. But yeah, so it's quite a bit cheaper. But now I'm not sure what the current pricing would be with everything, since it's out of Canada. This particular one, there are other models out there. There's Metra. There's 3 or 4 major brands that make smaller sorters like this as well. This is just the first one that was offered by LMC. But like I mentioned, we have had a really good customer service, and some of the brands are from overseas, and I would just caution people, if you're really interested in getting one of these, to do your research and make sure you know exactly what you're getting. And you want to make sure it's easier, I think, to deal with US or Canadian companies if you can, just because you don't have the language barrier, or time change difference. It can be a whole degree of complexity if you're trying to talk to somebody overseas, and do programming and things like that. I've heard from other people it can be a little bit difficult. So we've had a good experience.
Thank you. I just want to look for some questions here. Lauren asked, how many acres are you harvesting? Like for your dry bean acreage, what do you usually grow in a typical season?
Yeah, so we're usually growing between 8 and 10 different varieties on 30 acres, 25 to 30 acres last couple of years. And that just works well in our rotation, because we have to rotate. We're organic, so we have to rotate in other crops. And so that's one reason we started growing black oil sunflowers as well, because we need more acreage to be able to rotate in and grow things in the off year when we're not growing our beans. So if we were to expand our acreage to say 50 acres, we'd also need to have markets for those other things as well. But I think we're pretty happy with where we're at as far as the volume we're producing, and we don't get as much yield as conventional farmers get, but it works. It works for our operation. Usually with the heirlooms, you can get anywhere between 1,000 and 2 tons to the acre, somewhere like 1,000 pounds to 3 or 4,000 pounds, 2 tons to the acre. Conventional or those are the heirloom varieties. Some of the more commodity, newer varieties, commodity beans like kidneys, navies, blacks, you can get double that. You can get 2 to 3 tons to the acre if they do it well. So, but yeah, it works well for our size operation.
And so I think just one more question before we switch over to our research roundup. And we'll have time at the end for more questions as well. So this was an earlier question, Nick. Could you talk about your experience with some smaller equipment like stationary threshers? And I know cleaning beans by hand.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so and I think I talked to somebody about, or maybe Ivy, we had talked about it. Like, you don't need a color sorter. I mean, we cleaned by hand. We cleaned 20 acres of beans. They're not really dirty. If they were really dirty, it would take a long time. But essentially, we started out with just a half an acre, and then just slowly did more, 3, 5. I used to work up at Butterworks with Jack and Ann Laser. I'm sure many of you know them, and he grew beans for many years. And when he went more grass fed and started growing less grains, basically had the opportunity to purchase. That's where that original Bob's combine came from. But we were pulling up to 7 acres by hand, which sounds kind of crazy, but we did that up to 7 acres. We pulled by hand, just going down the rows, hiring people and anybody we could beg, steal, or borrow. We'd pull by hand, get them on wagons, kicker wagons, let them dry in the shed, and then pull them out on sunny days. And then once they were dry enough, we had a stationary thrashing machine. Joe Boston, Vermont Bean Crafters, has one, a small scale. And I think Heather, you guys had one, I think, too, at one point. But essentially, you can thresh a lot of beans like that. And then the small cleaners, size cleaners that you can get, they work really well for cleaning out your large stuff and small stuff. And then you can run them over a bean belt. You don't need a color sorter. We had a 6-person bean belt, 3 people on each side, and it takes more time and long days, but you can clean hundreds of pounds an hour if you're running it fast enough by hand. And so and then drying too. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in. That's our bean belt right there, with just a couple of people. And all of our beans at that point were in burlap bags, and we dry them like I showed earlier. And we'd palletize them and bring them up to our sorting space. And it's nice to have that space be climate controlled or have heat, because you're usually doing it in the winter. And if you're sitting there not moving much, you can get cold pretty quick. So we have it up in a heated basement. But we clean 10 tons a year like that by hand. And so you kind of start. That's what's nice about it. You can kind of start with what you have and just scale up from there. You don't feel like you have to get all this expensive, complicated equipment to start out with. It can definitely be done. There's hundreds and hundreds of acres, of thousands of acres grown with small to medium sized operations over the years. A lot of that's gotten consolidated and got much bigger in recent years, but there's still a lot of bean cleaning and sorting and stuff, equipment like in Maine and Michigan and many of the kind of bean growing hubs in our country. There's still a lot of equipment. Washington, Idaho, Maine is probably the closest one in this area. It used to grow a lot of beans, and there's still a lot of that equipment out there, small and mid-scale stuff, So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have it available, but like you were mentioning on one of our past webinars, Kevin Messing, who's in Michigan, he was talking a lot about his sourcing used equipment, building up his line, over time. And so we have a really good video of him. It's a slightly bigger scale now, but he talks about this too, buying used equipment, repurposing things. So we definitely will put that on the course page too. It's a good, he does a really good overview as well with all of his cleaning equipment. So
and it's always amazing to me too how like the essential nuts and bolts of how these machines work is almost the same. So you can have a new, $30,000 gravity table, that's going to work. It might be new flash, it's got new paint, it's metal, whatever. My gravity table that you saw is from like the 1950s. It's wooden, it's like old. It essentially works the same way, and you can find those, not readily, but like there's different dealers that have them and stuff. But if you keep your eyes open, there's definitely these machines are around, and don't feel like you have to buy something new and shiny. It works. The old ones sometimes work just as well. And like that fanning mill that we have that we run all of our beans through, it's a really old. It's actually wooden. It's got hand stenciling on it. But it works really well because it doesn't have any augers on it, which tend to split the beans. And so we like it. We run all of our beans through that little tiny machine, but it works well. And it's essentially the same thing as a brand new one that you're going to pay, $5,000 for. We picked that thing up for like $150, and
Right.
so it
Yeah.
works good.
So thank you so much. And if people still have questions, you can put them in the chat, or we'll save time at the end. But I just want to switch over to our research roundup now so that we have plenty of time to hear about that. So Atha, if you want to start sharing your slides, I'll just briefly introduce you to the group. So last week, you all heard from Dr. Sarah Pethy-Bridge about dry bean diseases. And so today for our research roundup, we actually have her postdoc who's going to talk about her research on the diversity of root rot pathogens in dry bean production systems of New York and Maine. So with that, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Yep. Are you able to see my screen, everyone?
Yep, we can see the full screen.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. As Ivy said, that I'm going to follow up from the last week class on the mostly on the disease part of the dry bean. And today I will be talking about the diversity of the different root rot pathogens that are associated with the dry bean in New York and in Maine region. Okay. So this is again the part of this EcoBean project that we have been talking about since last few weeks. So in this project, my lab, Dr. Sarah Pethy-Bridge is looking from the root pathogen side. So we're looking mostly on the root pathogens and also on the microbial abundance. But today I will be talking mostly only from the root pathogen side. Why this disease is so important is because this is one of the most destructive disease in dry beans as it reduces the plant vigor, plant population, and also the productivity of the dry bean production. This is important because like other diseases, like so many other plant diseases, most of them diseases are caused by the one pathogen, but this is a complex disease as there is a multiple pathogens that are responsible to cause this root rot. So we call it as a root rot complex. The frequency of this disease occurrence is annually, so that you can see every year. The percentage of the areas that is affected will be like up to 100%, and the yield reductions due to this root rot disease will be up to 80 to sometimes in 100% in severely affected areas. The difference would be because of the regional differences. It depends on the different soil factors or the different other dry bean growing regions. The main goal of this research today is that we are going to characterize the diversity of the root rot pathogen from the dry bean roots across 2 years from 2024 and 2025. And we are looking at the 2 different locations, 2 different states, one from New York and one from Maine. And also we are determining the effect of different management practices like tillage and nitrogen management, the difference between the 2 different locations and 2 different years on major root rot pathogen groups that we were able to isolate. So just to give you our research plot map, so this is how it looks like. It is a very complicated trial which have involved a lot of different people from different departments looking at different goals. But in our case, this is one of the trial which was done in the Musgrave Research Farm in New York and in University of Maine with a similar layout. And here we were looking at the effect of the TLAs, like TLAs versus no TLAs, and also in the effect of nitrogen dose. So we looked into the zero, that is no application of nitrogen versus the 50 nitrogen lbs per acre effect, and also the difference in the timing of the nitrogen applications, which was done in planting time, fall, and springtime. So what we did was that from both location in both years in 2024 and 2025, we took the 6 roots from each different treatments, from its TLAs, no TLAs, from different nitrogen dose. And then we did the fungal isolation. So we looked into the different disease symptoms, which are mostly like this kind of blackish or like kind of rotten symptoms in the roots, and we isolated the some pathogen from these lesions, and we did some identification using both the morphological identification, and we also run some molecular identification in all those isolates that we were able to isolate from both location. So for the results that we were able to isolate around 454 isolates in both location in both years, which were distributed across 17 different genera groups. So you can see here in this bar plot that in Maine, we were able to isolate Pythium as the most dominant one in both years, followed by Fusarium, followed by Rhizoctonia. And here in New York, we were able to isolate the Fusarium as the most dominant one in both years, followed by the Rhizoctonia, and also the Macrophomina was also isolated in New York, especially in 2024. So from here, the most dominant pathogens that causing the root rot disease in New York and Maine were Fusarium, Pythium, Macrophomina, and Rhizoctonia across both locations, except the Macrophomina was only isolated from New York. So I just want to highlight about these each different 4 dominant species, starting with the Fusarium. The disease that this can cause on the dry beans, they looks like here in the picture. So in the roots, they can cause this root rot, this kind of like blackish symptoms, followed by when they have in foliar, there you can see the yellowing of the leaves, and in later there will be no production of the pods, and eventually the plant dies. The disease is caused by the many species of the Fusarium, so it's kind of a part of a root rot complex. So there is not specific one particular species only causing this disease. So there are multiple Fusarium species. This pathogen likes a cool soil temperature, which is around 50 to 60, with the moisture stress, which could be either the excessive moisture or the low moisture, like a drought condition. They can persist in soil for a very long time. And they have this kind of chlamydospores, which are kind of resting spores that they can stay in the soil for a very long time, even without the host, and they can infect the next cropping season. So these are how they look. So these are some of the prevalent species that we were able to identify from this project in this our research. Among these different Fusarium species, the most dominant species was Fusarium oxysporum and Fusarium solanae in our collection, but we were also able to see other different Fusarium species. You can see how they look like in the lab when you culture the pure culture of each species. They are very diverse. They're in the morphology, so it's really hard to identify without some other screening like identification process. So the next dominant that we found was the Pythium species. So they are the called Oomycete species, and they cause mostly the pre and the post emergence damping off. So you can see here in the seed that either they cause the symptoms before they emerge, like inside the soil, or after the emergence, like a post emergence damping off. They also survives as the spores like called oospores, either in the plant or in the soils, as a dominant spores, resting spores to infect for next season. This pathogen favors the wet conditions and the lower temperature, so they really like moisture and very cool temperature in order to survive and in order to infect. And this is how they look in the lab when you isolate them. So they are more like whitish kind of mycelia and very watery, watery morphology. The other third dominant we identify or we isolate was Rhizoctonia, mostly the Rhizoctonia solanae species, and how they look like here in the plates in the lab. They cause the similar kind of root rot symptoms like reddish browning on the taproot and the stem of the plants on the dry beans. The lesion, they can be distinctively seen as a brick red color. They are more towards the red color than the black color. And again, the moderate temperature or the environmental conditions that this pathogen requires is more like a very flexible from cool to moderate temperature and also the moderate moisture condition in the soil. Other pathogen, especially in New York, we were able to see this Macrophomina phaseolina, only the Macrophomina phaseolina species. This is a pathogen causing the charcoal rot disease, where you can see the pictures here. They can call like this blackish kind of symptoms on the lower stems and the roots of the plants. These pathogens are very like a warm associated or heat associated pathogens. So they're really like very high temperature and very low moisture content. So very drought condition and high temperature are very favorable for this disease. And again, as a survival structure, they are surviving as a microsclerosia in the plants or residue or in soil. You can even see them by the naked eyes, like you can see small blackish kind of sclerosia which are present on the disease symptoms if the plant is severely affected by this pathogen. The interesting part about this pathogen was that we were able to report this pathogen for the first time in New York. So before this, it was not reported in dry bean infecting in New York. We were able to see I think there was one report in soybean, but not in dry beans. So this was kind of like a official report of the presence of this Macrophomina phaseolina in dry beans in New York. And we were able to produce all these similar symptoms even in our lab conditions, in greenhouse condition in our research. So next we looked into the effect of all those management practices, starting with the TLAs. So we look if the TLAs has any effect on this, especially those 4 dominant pathogens. Unfortunately, we were not able to see any significant difference between the TLAs versus no TLAs among all these 4 different pathogens. So based on this results, we found that TLAs did not significantly affect the isolation of the these 4 root rot pathogens. We looked into the nitrogen management, both on nitrogen dose and nitrogen application timing. And again, like in TLAs, we were not able to see any significantly difference among these different treatments of the nitrogen dose versus nitrogen timing that were not able to affect the isolation of these root rot pathogens. However, we looked into the effect of the locations by states, by Maine versus New York, and by year also. And we were able to see the differences between the locations. Like here, you can see here in these 2 red box that Pythium was mostly isolated in Maine. Which could be due to the lower temperature in the Maine compared to the New York, as they like very wet and cool temperature. Fusarium was isolated in both locations, but the number of isolates that we obtained was really high in New York compared to here in Maine. In case of Macrophomina, we only see this in New York. We didn't isolate any Macrophomina from Maine in our research collection data. And next, we also looked into the timing difference, if there is effect between the 2024 versus 2025. So for most of the other three pathogens, we didn't see any differences, but in Macrophomina, we were able to isolate a lot of isolations from the 2024 collection compared to 2025. And this could be due to the fact about the environmental, like the weather conditions, because the Macrophomina likes very warm temperature, like a very high temperature. And in 2024, we saw that in New York, it was very hot compared to 2025. So one of the reasons that we see in 2024 a lot could be because of the weather conditions in 2024. So next, after that, we wanted to look about the legacy effect of this dry bean management in the next cropping season. So what we did that in the same plot where the dry beans were grown in 2024, after the dry bean harvest, the barley was grown on the same plot in 2025. And we collect the soil from this barley plot. So this is not a barley plot. So we collect the soil from all the barley plots from the same plot where the dry beans was grown and different treatments were applied in 2024. We took those soil in the our greenhouse chamber, and then we did some root bioassay kind of experiment. So where we grow our dry bean, one of the dry bean cultivar in the soils that we collected from the barley, and the goal was here to see if the management practices that were applied during the dry bean are also able to see any legacy effect in next year in dry beans. So if they can reduce any root rot pathogens in those in the soil or not. So we did both for this for both relocation in Maine and New York. And first we looked into the disease severity. So we grow the plants in those barley soils. And then we looked into the roots at 35 days after planting. And here we did the disease severity rating. So you can see 1 to 3 is kind of the one that looks good. Like here, more like whitey, not much disease symptoms. 4 to 6 are like moderate. Like you see some symptoms, but not a lot, like 60%. And 79 are more like a very highly disease symptoms. In our experiment, we saw that all the samples from the Maine has kind of similar disease rating, which we label them as a 2 because all the roots were like similar, like this. The white is very tiny symptoms, but not a lot. However, in New York, we see a lot of variations. So they range from 2 to sometimes in 8 in some samples. So you can see there is like a huge difference between the disease severity in terms of location in Maine versus New York. And again, in the same way, we also isolate the pathogens from those roots that were grown on the barley soils. So here in this box, the red box, we can see like we were able to isolate like a significant number of the most dominant pathogens that we call as Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoctonia from the same soil. So that means that they are still persist in the soil after a year after harvesting the dry beans. In the same way, we looked into the effect of those management practices of tillage versus nitrogen management on those root bioassay isolates. Like in the field samples, we didn't see any significant difference in the isolation of the root rot because of tillage or because of the nitrogen management. So from here, what we can see that there is a lot of diversity, especially between the geography in between two locations. The Northeast dry bean root rot communities are very diverse. So it's not only a single pathogen that is causing this disease. So there are like many pathogens, but mostly dominated by Fusarium, Pythium, Macrophomina, and Rhizoctonia. So the management must target all the pathogen complex groups. So there's like more than just targeting on a single pathogen. We see the significant effect between the two states and the two different years, which means that we have to consider the different regional climate and also the field history in order to manage this root rot pathogen disease. We saw that location-specific pathogen, mostly the PTM, was more common in Maine, and Macrophomina was only found in New York. So which means that we have to have the this region-specific management practices rather than like a one common for all the Northeast region. We see that very limited or like not significant influence of the tillage and nitrogen management, which highlights that these practices may not be enough to mitigate the disease risk, especially this root rot disease risk. We also see the year-to-year variation, especially the Macrophomina, so which means that there is a potential to use all these environmental or weather data for the disease forecasting tools. And about the root rot pathogen bioassay, we see that there is a persistence of the major root rot pathogen in soil that could infect beyond the dry bean cropping phase, which highlights the potential cross-crop disease risk. And lastly, there is very limited or the inconsistent legacy effect of this dry bean management on the root rot pathogen in the subsequent years. So that means that we have to focus on the current season's management practices rather than to rely in the previous years. So with that, I would like to acknowledge everyone, especially my PI, Sarah Pratibres, and all the people who are involving in this research from University of Maine and Cornell and the funding resources. And thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll thank Sarah too. Sarah was answering a couple questions in the chat while you were presenting. So if folks do have any more questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat. And we have about 12 minutes left of the session. So we'll open it back up to questions for both of our speakers. One of the ones I'll jump back to Seth for a minute. There's a couple people, they wanted to just run through the whole harvest process. So pulling, windrowing, drying, and storing, then using a gravity table or a color sorter to clean and bagging your beans. Did they miss any steps in that process, or is that kind of a good overview of the
yeah, so one really important one is pre-cleaning before it goes into the drying setup. So if you don't, I always tell people harvesting beans can be a bit like pulling potatoes. There's like a lot of dirt involved. So if you have a type of soil where there's a lot of small rocks that are bean sized, you'd want to have a destoner in that process. We have sandier soil, so we don't suffer from that problem as much. You're always going to have a little bit of rocks, but the destoner would go before the gravity table. But at any rate, once you harvest out of the combine or pull by hand, it's not as much of an issue if you're pulling by hand. And I think I noticed in the chat somebody mentioned a really effective way on a small scale. If you don't necessarily have a wagon or you're not big enough to fill a wagon, what we would do is we would pull and put them onto wagons, like kicker wagons, like for hay bales, and they have sides on them. We go about 4 feet deep, and then we put 2x4s across, and then go another 4 feet on top of that. So it helps to kind of keep the weight from all crushing down at the bottom, and the beans dry actually really well. That way we pull them out in the sunshine during the day, and then put them underneath the shed at night, or if it was rainy, and let the air blow through them. They dry a little more that way. But at any rate, whether you thresh them by hand or combine in any form, you're going to want to have a really good pre-cleaner. And so that's where we run it through our clipper, that small wooden one we have. We run it through the clipper right out of the field. The beans are still wet, but you don't want to put into your drying system, whether it's your dryer or your bags that you dry. If you dry in that way, you do not want to have dirt and green weed seeds. You want to get all the green stuff out of it. You want to get all the dirt and stuff out of it, debris. So you'd want to have that after threshing and before drying, and it'll just make the air flow better through the beans, and they'll dry more effectively that way. But after that, you can have a destoner, gravity table. You can use a spiral separator and then either color sort or hand cleaning.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. And we started really small and have moved up to larger now, but there's obviously operations that are, 100 times our size and they do it completely different. I think I noticed in the chat too, somebody asked about augers.
yep.
That's a good point. So we do have a few augers in our system. Generally, you really try to minimize that if at all possible. Not all beans will split every year or in all conditions, but the drier they are and the smaller they are, especially the small round beans, are more likely to split. And so you do not want to have augers because the way they works okay for grains and corn and things like that. But with beans, you can have a lot of splits, which you can sell as animal feed or something, but it's at a far reduced rate. So you try not to have any splits if at all possible. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And how much time between pulling and threshing are you usually?
So generally it's like a 2-day process with that step. And we didn't really talk about it much, but the larger beans, like kidneys, soldier beans, you think of anything that's like a larger kidney shaped bean, Jacob's cattle, tiger's eye, anything like that. You can get a lot of splits and a lot of problems if you try to direct thresh them. So it adds more time and expense, but really any dry edible beans, the big ones, you should really either pull them and run them through a special bean thresher that's made for beans. Don't run them through a grain combine because there's two different ways to thresh grains and beans. There's either rasp bar cylinders or there's spike tooth cylinders. So just imagine like a spike tooth cylinder in a bean combine. There's actually two cylinders and they're spinning a lot slower, but they're actually thrashing by doing this kind of action where you have fingers passing by each other and it's much less prone to split. The other type of thrasher is called a rasp bar. So like that big 9,500 grain combine that we use, you can do, 10 times the beans in a day with that. But we use our smaller beans that are less likely to have an issue splitting. And that's a different type of a system. So it's a rasp bar cylinder. So there's a concave, but there's pressure there. And beans can't stand that pressure, especially if they're dry, they'll just split. And some varieties are really bad for it. So that wasn't really part of the presentation, but there's kind of two systems. There's either pulling and threshing, which is much better for dry beans, or you can use a grain combine or a soybean combine for smaller beans that were what we call direct cut. So it's much quicker. But to answer the original question, the pulling happens in the morning, like today. If it was harvest season, you'd pull early in the morning. They sit over the day, and then the next morning you'd windrow, and then that same day, that afternoon, once they're dry enough, you thresh them. So it's really a two-day process.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And while you were talking, there's a couple questions about ideal moisture. So what are you looking for when you're harvesting the beans? How dry do you want those plants to be before you're out pulling? And then once you're looking to store them, what's your target?
Yeah.
storage?
So general storage for most grains is around 13%. 12 to 14%, something like that. The drier they are, the longer they're going to keep, the less storage issues. The problem with beans is if they're too dry, you're going to be more likely to split them. So like a good rule of thumb is like to know when to harvest is, thankfully, like in our area, the frost is actually our friend. So it actually helps to kill or desiccate the plants. If you're a conventional producer, you can spray, weed killer to kill, and some farmers do, not everybody, but they desiccate the plants down. It's much quicker and easier to harvest with brown or dried up leaves. So we try to let Mother Nature do that and shock them by getting a good frost. It doesn't happen every year, but what's more important than the leaves is the pods when they're nice and dry. Most people know, when you pick a bean pods up and you shake them and you can hear them rattling inside there. I usually split a few open, and we do have moisture tester that we use for grains and sometimes, but in general, like a good rule of thumb is just take and bite them between your teeth, and you should be able to, they should be a little soft where you can make an indent, but
Mhm.
not hard enough to crack. If they get too dry, which can be a problem if you have dry or windy conditions, or if you're down in the Southwest. You'll get all kinds of problems with pre-threshing, where anybody that's grown beans knows that beans have this mechanism where they can self-thresh. And I was telling Ivy earlier in the week, like there's nothing worse than getting your beans like pulled and windrowed, and you're walking around the field checking, and you can hear them popping, and literally it's the pods will self-thresh, and it's like you're watching all your profits go on the ground. So you don't want them too dry, but they're generally dry enough to and it's generally like 20%, like 17 to 20%, somewhere in there probably. But it's, bite them so they're, firm, but not enough to crack. And then once they're dry enough, then in the dryer, then you're, basically you're not able to do that. They're really dry where they will like kind of crack between your teeth. You just want to be careful, but you can tell a lot. Most farmers just kind of go off that rule of thumb. And again, the drier they are, the longer they store. But you just have to keep in mind that if you're processing them while they're really dry, you can be more likely to have splitting problems in the process.
Yeah. I was looking through the chat too, and there was a couple questions about pests. And in an earlier session when we were talking with Sarah, we were kind of talking about, the issue with Mexican bean beetle, and we don't really have sort of becoming a bigger problem. I don't know if folks on the call have any resources we can share. Someone had asked if there was a good place to look for information. I'll open that up. I don't know if Kristen or Sarah has any thoughts, or Heather. But Kristen asked about weevils or seed pests in your storage, if you had any issues there.
So we have never had an issue. Occasionally, you'll notice like a bean that's like had a post-harvest, like hole bitten in it or whatever. But it's very minimal. We switched to all our beans are bagged, and we actually put them in shipping containers now in pallets, and those shipping containers are completely sealed. And we can segregate by different types, and we have like, black oil sunflowers in one, and wheat, and then beans in another one. But beans for us are pretty stable. Really not much bothers them once they've been harvested. Again, the drier things are in storage, the less problems you're going to have with insects. And that goes across the board for any type of grains. A good rule of thumb is like the drier, the better. They store longer, less pest problems. Obviously, you don't want to have any mold and things like that too if they're too wet. But I haven't really had much experience with them as far as organic, like insecticides or something. There's a couple different things that you can use. Neem oil, it's a broad spectrum. You can use Pyganic, which is a Prethurium class, basically chrysanthemum oil. The only problem we've ever really had is leafhoppers in our area. Not every year, not that prevalent, but occasionally we've had problems with leafhoppers, and that Pyganic is really effective, certified organic mix. You buy it by the 1 gallon or 5 gallon. It's quite expensive, but faced with the alternative of losing significant, yield and damage from the leaf hoppers, sometimes those things can be effective, but we don't do it. We got a sprayer, but we hardly ever use it. So.
Yeah. I'll just, Shannon, if you could put the slides up, we're getting closer to the end of our session, but it's awesome to have so many questions. And someone had put in the chat, we need to do a field trip out, just so you can, I think one of the best ways to learn is just to see this equipment and see what people are doing. So
yeah, and actually I should mention too, if anybody wants to follow up, I don't know if they can share my email or whatever, but you can also go onto our website, morningstarfarmvt.com, and there's more information on there. I actually have some more presentations. I think it was a field trip we did like 10 years ago here at the farm. We're explaining more stuff. There's some videos on there, and you can certainly reach out to us through our website with any follow-up questions, or, more than happy to help people. There was many people, like I said, the Jack and Ann Laser at Butterworks Farm were really instrumental in kind of helping us get started, finding equipment. there's another really good resource, Northern Grain Growers Association, which many people here or several people here today are part of. There's a lot more information on there, and good contact people. There's the grain conference coming up next month in March is excellent.
Yep.
There'll be classes and presentations on that, and it's just a really excellent way for people to be able to kind of rub shoulders with lots of producers of dry beans there, organic farmers and conventional. That's once a year, and that should definitely be a must go to event
Yeah.
in a month. So, and maybe you already talked about that, but I just wanted to bring that to everybody's
No,
attention.
that's great. You're doing our PR for us. But yeah, like Seth, we'll definitely put Shannon put in the chat the link to your website. But we'll also make sure it's on the course page with the recording so that folks can follow up if they have additional questions. And Kristen also put an article in the chat about managing bean beetle. So we'll make sure to put that on the course page as well. If you don't get a chance to open it now, we'll have that available. And so,
And people are always asking about seed too.
yeah.
So a couple, I just was jotting down because there's always people are interested in that. So High Mowing here in Vermont, Fedco in Maine, Fedco Seed, they have sources of good organic seed, heirloom varieties, larger scale. What's the name of the publication you guys put out, Ivy, last year?
Yep.
With
So we
some
have our
sources.
dry bean production guide, which
Yeah,
has
so
that
that's a
list.
really good one. There's a whole page on there of several good sources for larger scale seed too. That's in general, like we can sell people beans. We don't sell seed necessarily for that purpose, just because we've run into issues in the past where somebody else sudden got something growing, and you're always wondering if it's on the seed or whatever. So in general, if you can get your seed from out west, that's always a really good idea if possible, because they have much lower moisture and much better quality seed, and less disease than we would have from here in the Northeast. So
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We have the production guide linked here, so folks want to look at it online. And a plug for our upcoming grains conference. We'll have all of the production guides, dry bean reports, all of that stuff available in person if you're in Vermont. So I just want to be respectful of people's time. So this is a QR code if you do need CCA credits, and if you could, we have a survey we're asking folks to fill out for us about their experience with this dry bean course. So we would really appreciate that if you could take the time and answer our questions. And I'll just thank our speakers again, Seth and Atha, for joining us and providing us with all this information, and Sarah for chiming in, and everyone who's made this course possible. So just a thank you from all of our team here. I don't know if Heather or anyone has any last minute.
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, and hopefully, we'll be doing more work on dry beans that we can share with everyone in the future. Thank you, Seth, for your time as well.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. It's always there's always such a variety of people at these dry bean events, large scale, small scale.
Yeah.
There's no right way to do it. You gotta start somewhere, and I'm really appreciative to Heather and her team in particular here at UVM, as we're really blessed to have them in our neck of the woods up here in the Northeast. But they're more than willing to field questions even from out of our region, and really instrumental in kind of helping. There's not a lot of big ag dollars behind some of these dry bean projects and stuff like there is, especially with the heirloom bean. So I think things like this are really important to kind of keep some of these varieties going and keep interest in them alive. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everyone. And hopefully we'll see you at the grain conference. And I know New York also has a grain conference coming up right around the same time as ours too. So hopefully you can make it out to one of those. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you.